Breaking news, an abortion bombshell hitting tonight.
Politico publishing a report saying a draft opinion circulated among Supreme Court justices suggests that Roe v. Wade should be overturned.
An initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Alito showing the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade.
An early draft opinion of a Supreme Court decision set to be released at the end of June, early July, has been leaked to the public, and it looks like the Supreme Court, after 49 years, intends to overturn the precedent set in Roe v. Wade. We're going to talk about this, we're going to discuss this, we're going to discuss the leak, the reaction, everything and anything related to this case, but first, we got to throw it over to our sponsor, Health with Justice Transition, Sponsor Transition. Our appearance has a huge impact on our mental health. Everyone knows this, including multi-million-dollar beauty corporations. This is why there are so many anti-aging products out there on the market, and most of them just don't work. They use cheap ingredients, or they are only a short-term solution. This is one of the reasons why I love multi-collagen over at Health with Justice. This is the premium collagen powder. It helps address the root problems in aging, which is a depreciation of collagen production in your body. One scoop of this of the day in the morning in your drink, and all of a sudden you're gonna have soft, itty bitty baby soft youthful glow skin. Look at my youthful glow skin, it is quite literally glowing. Look at my skin. And I got great news. If you go over to healthwithjustice.com right now, you will get 51% off this amazing powder. That is healthwithjustice.com, 60-day money back guarantee, 51% off, healthwithjustice.com. So last night, a draft opinion from Justice Alito of the Supreme Court became public somehow, more on that later, and it looks like the court intends to overturn a precedent set in Roe v. Wade and in the Casey case. This is huge news for the pro-life conservatives everywhere, and for the left, and for all the people, honestly, who were making the case that Hillary Clinton winning over Donald Trump in 2016 was just not that big of a deal, because it appears that the three Trump nominees have voted in lockstep to overturn Roe versus Wade. And since it's a 5-4 decision, and Roberts, the Bush appointee, is voting with the liberals on the court, it appears that Trump's Supreme Court nominees, if this is to hold, are the ones who made this happen, thus making the overturning of Roe versus Wade a huge part of former President Donald Trump's presidential legacy. Now, the first thing that we need to get out of the way before we dive into this around 98-page draft opinion by Justice Alito is that it is, in fact, as of this moment, just that, a draft opinion. Supreme Court cases do not become official until they are actually published in late June and July, and it is not unheard of for a draft opinion at this early stage to be significantly different from what is finally published in a month. Again, we're going to talk about the significance of the leak and what may or may not be behind it a little bit later in this video. However, it is important to note that if this draft opinion holds, it will not be a narrow Supreme Court decision on the abortion issue. It will be a full-throated rebuke of the Roe versus Wade precedent from 1973, which has caused a lot of people on the left wing to light their hair on fire. A protest started forming after this announcement was made, and it grew ever stronger during the course of the night.
Abortion is out there! Abortion is out there! Anti-choice is so 50 fucking years ago! Anti-choice is so 50 fucking years ago! Anti-choice is so 50 fucking years ago! Anti-choice is so...
First time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America.
You saw the coat hangers, eventually you're gonna see the Handmaid's Tale thing, and the left reaction has been getting more and more unhinged about this particular issue. So I think it's important for us to discuss what actually a repeal of Roe versus Wade would actually mean, or an overturning of the precedent set in Roe versus Wade would actually mean, and that really is as follows. Now, it is important to note that a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the discussion around Roe versus Wade being overturned is framed by the media and by the left wing intentionally, or due to the fact that they just don't have any knowledge about how the Supreme Court works, in terms that are just a false dichotomy. The idea is, if we don't have Roe, then abortion becomes illegal nationwide. Roe is what makes abortion legal nationwide. And half of that is true. Roe versus Wade, when it was codified by the Supreme Court, did legalize abortion for the first 2 trimesters across the country without any exemptions. If you wanted one, you could get one. States could have little tinkerings and try to limit it here and there, but typically what the Supreme Court was determining as the standard in that case was viability, and they used the justification of privacy, which was something they kind of pulled out of nowhere during the Supreme Court decision. Now, the reason I say they pulled it out of nowhere is because they essentially put the right to abortion on par with the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, or your right to be protected against searches and seizures. And in reality, we all know in the 11-page document that is the United States Constitution, which was ratified in the 1700s, and despite what people who are proponents of Roe versus Wade actually believe, there is nothing in this 200-plus-year-old document that says that the Constitution for the first and second trimester says it's all good in the hood for abortion, but in the third trimester, it's a states' rights issue. According to the Constitution, according to the 10th Amendment, which says that powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved for the states and the people in those states, we don't have any federal laws pertaining to abortion, and there's no federal powers pertaining to abortion. So what this overturning actually does is revert this issue back to the states. And I don't want to downplay that in terms of if you're a pro-choice person and what that means, because there are several states that have passed laws severely restricting abortion in comparison to the Roe v. Wade standard, including Mississippi, which is at the heart of this case, which has some of the most dramatic restrictions comparatively. That being said, there's also states that have trigger laws where if Roe versus Wade is overturned, they automatically implement their legislation that bans or restricts abortion severely. So, based on what we've seen, this will have a huge impact in largely red states in the United States of America, and it will also give purple states some room to run in terms of where they want to draw that line, because Roe versus Wade essentially drew the line between 20 and 24 weeks, and now the states will have free reign to do horrible, bigoted, religious zealotry restrictions of abortion, just like those evil Christian nationalist nations in Europe, which have significantly lower thresholds for abortion compared to the United States of America. Honestly, a lot of people don't realize this, but the way Americans view abortion in comparison to modern Western countries, we draw the line typically way further based on the Roe versus Wade decision than any of those other places. Also, those places just kind of regard it as a non-issue. They passed the law, they drew the line, and they let it alone, and people don't really argue over it that much. But in the United States, it is elevated to a constitutional right for people on the left, one of our most sacred rights, and for people on the right, they consider it to be an active form of murder, thus the polarization in the United States of America based on this issue. Now, I was never a big abortion guy. It was never one of my top issues, either pro or against, which is why I have exactly 0 videos discussing the topic before today, because again, it's just something that I'm not that interested in. But it used to be back in the day that you could have intelligent legal minds, both on the left or the right, whether or not they agreed with Roe versus Wade or disagreed with Roe versus Wade, who pointed out the fact that Roe versus Wade makes no sense at all as a constitutional decision. It used to be the left-wing legal constitutional perspective that they thought that Roe versus Wade was great, it's a great law, but it should have been written by the legislature because it makes no sense to say that the Supreme Court can just decide what the Constitution says on this very specific issue, especially when you consider that the states are typically the ones who regulate medical procedures, license doctors, etc. So this came out of nowhere in the first place. I've seen a lot of people in the mainstream media talking about how this is minority rule, this was undemocratic, and all this nonsense. Let me play you some clips of MSNBC talking in this exact same manner.
And included in this fundamentally different world is what the other part of what we're experiencing tonight is minority government, minority ruled government. And the Supreme Court is the most incredible exemplar of that. You have these judges appointed to the Supreme Court by two presidents who did not win the most votes in their presidential election. George W. Bush appointed the justice who wrote this opinion. He did not win the most votes in his presidential election, but he won the Electoral College. And then you have Donald Trump appointing three of these deciding justices. He did not come close to winning the most votes, but he got the presidency in this country because of this capacity for minority rule in our government.
Now look, I'm actually fine with you making the point or trying to take a stand on the fact that 4 of the 5 Supreme Court justices that ruled in this manner on this specific case, or at least are believed to have ruled in this manner on this specific case, were not appointed by presidents that were elected with the majority of support. Now, that doesn't matter. That's not how our system works, but you can make that point and say that this is a form of minority rule. The overturning of Roe versus Wade does not have majority support based on the presidents that appointed the Supreme Court justices that made the decisions or whatever. You can make that case, and Lawrence O'Donnell made that case right there in that moment. But the thing is, Roe versus Wade never had that in the first place, and it's significantly worse in terms of minority versus majority in what the Supreme Court ruled in that instance. Because all the way back when Roe was first taken up, there was only 6 states that had legal elective abortions. 6 in the entire country, meaning 44, a supermajority of the states, did not have this procedure available electively. 30 states had outright bans, and 20 states had it legal for some circumstances and not for others. So even if you slice it that way, the United States of America, back when Roe was decided, was very much in the pro-life camp. So if you're going to go after President Trump or President George W. Bush for their appointees because they got less than 50% of the votes, because they got less votes, at least Bush did in his first election, than the person he was running against, then you have to point out that Roe versus Wade on its own was just the Supreme Court passing down an edict without any popular support on an issue that should have been thrown to the legislature in the first place. On top of that, I do want to point out that the Democrats at any point in time could have codified abortion into law at the federal level if they wanted to, and not relied on Roe versus Wade. They ran away from this issue. They kind of abandoned it. They made it a wedge issue with the Supreme Court, much in the same way that the Republicans did, and Republicans finally came out on top 49 years later. On top of that, I also want to point out how Justice Roberts, in terms of Republican voting on issues at the Supreme Court level, is an absolute failure. Everybody who called it at the time that he would not be a good justice for the conservatives was right. Again, whatever your perspective on the issue is, you have to point out that this is now Obamacare and Roe versus Wade, and the Republicans have basically been putting all their justices on the Supreme Court since Roe versus Wade for the sole purpose of overturning Roe versus Wade. So it's an absolute failure even in that regard on their part. They're just one justice away, one Kavanaugh or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, by the way, this is totally on her, trying to wait it out so that she could have been appointed by Hillary Clinton, so she could have been replaced by the first woman president because she was so pro-woman. Kind of totally left you guys out to dry in that regard, if I mean so myself. The notorious RBG notoriously lost the issue of abortion by trying to be symbolically replaced by Hillary Clinton, which is kind of hilarious and ironic. But again, overall, I must stress that regardless of what your position is on abortion in the United States of America, the correct ruling by the Supreme Court was to not allow Roe versus Wade to stand, because Roe versus Wade has no basis in constitutional law. Now look, that's the constitutional argument. Nobody actually cares about the United States Constitution anymore. Everybody just wants the Supreme Court to operate on their behalf, with or without constitutional precedent to back it. So whatever, that's not really as important as the implications of this decision, or the potential implications of this decision. And according to the left, this is going to cause a women's revolution against the conservatives, and thus save the Democrats and usher in decades or millennia of Democratic majority rule in the United States of America. Wow, the Republicans just stepped out of bounds. The Democrats is going to take over. The Democrats got this going good.
For their gracious aid.
I am so sorry to my world. I am so sorry to my world. This is not what we want.
We will face challenges.
There's so much potential
but we will get the job done.
for
beauty and for devastation. In this one moment, it's just almost incomprehensible that they can exist right now. So.
And we are grateful.
Now, as you guys can probably tell by the sarcasm in my voice when I was talking before I did the cut to this part of the video, I don't really believe that this is going to be the major gigantic win, women's revolution for the Democratic Party at the ballot box that it was projected to be all these decades of my life, because the American people tend to have a bias towards normalcy. Think about the issue of same-sex marriage. It never won on any ballot initiative ever in the United States of America. Even after California got it legalized by some mechanism, I believe a court decision, when it was put up to a vote, even in California, people voted it down 52-49. It was a huge loser for the gays on the ballot in this country. Then the Supreme Court rules that gay marriage is a constitutional right. They legalize it nationwide, and now you look at the polling data and it's not even close. The Republicans are never going to win on that issue. Even in conservative states, the needle has moved so significantly because we've had gay marriage for a while, or the precedent had been set, and people tend to be biased towards normal. People tend to defer towards authority. So since the Supreme Court said that the gays' marriage was as constitutional as any other marriage, and denying the gays' marriage is unconstitutional, most people just kind of went along to get along, or a significant number of people went along to get along. So, based on the fact that the Supreme Court appears to be striking down Roe v. Wade, you're actually going to see the amount of people that are pro-choice switch to the pro-life camp just based on that, just based on the appeal to authority. On top of that, the imaging technology that we've had for early pregnancies has advanced so much since the 1970s that people can actually see a fetus in development at various stages, and after a shorter period of time than you believe, that fetus starts to look like a baby. This is one of the reasons why that without a Supreme Court decision in Europe, again, far more liberal than the United States by comparison on many different social issues, they actually draw the abortion line significantly closer to the moment of conception than is drawn in the United States of America, which ultimately is where I'm going to think that the majority of states are going to end up 10 years from now. People aren't going to outright ban abortion. The conservatives will be fighting this at the state level for years and years and years, unless they do something federally, and then that gets kicked to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court validates that federal abortion ban or whatever. For the most part, we're going to end up with many states in this country having severely restricted abortions, if not outright banned. States like New York and other left-wing states will have broad access to abortion much later into the pregnancy, and most states will arrive somewhere in the middle of Roe versus Wade and an outright ban, somewhere around 8 to 12 weeks. And the reason I truly believe this is because had it not been for the Supreme Court setting this absolute no way can you go below this line, we likely would have hashed this out much in the same way that Europe did, and they ended up significantly lower than the point in time where we ended up. Now look, that's my forecast, that's my prediction, that's what I believe to be true, and since I am always right, that will ultimately end up happening. Set it in stone, carve it out. The future has been written by me right here on this channel, and I want to talk about the leaks now, because the leaks are absolutely crucial and probably more fascinating than the overturning of what many legal scholars acknowledge is kind of a ridiculous precedent set in the United States of America. So draft opinions don't typically get leaked in the United States of America. It is not a thing that happens in this country. The Supreme Court plays that really close to the vest, and this has allowed a lot of people to speculate on why this was leaked. Now, the most common answer, the answer put forward by most people on the internet.com, is that there is some form of deep state or left-wing activists with access to this information that leaked it to the press so that they can gin up hysteria and rally against the Supreme Court and maybe possibly intimidate them into augmenting or outright changing their ruling. That is the argument put forward by a lot of people on twitter.com that are of a right-wing bent. And honestly, I can see that potentially happening. We've seen activists leaking crucial information to the press in order to go after conservatives in the government multiple different times. We understand that the deep state is not some crazy conspiracy theory. It's just a lifelong people who work in government who have their own agendas outside of who's elected president or who's appointed at the top of their department. And this is typical when you have an institution that is professionalized and is meant to go on without the whims of the political branches of government. Now, that's the basic answer. That's what you're getting from conservative media. That's what you're getting from left-wing media, except they're praising the person who did the leaks. That's what you're getting from everyone and anyone who hasn't gone down the conspiracy rabbit hole like I've gone down, because I base my opinions on the fact that I don't trust Justice Alito at all. Now, I've talked about multiple different times on this channel how there's 3 different types of Republican justices broadly that we can talk about in terms of appointments. And because Republicans are really bad at picking between the 3, they should only pick from category 1, which is the Constitutionalist Justice. We often get bad conservative rulings from the Supreme Court, or bad constitutional rulings, because Republicans try to do what Democrats do and just put partisan hacks on the court. So these categories are the first one, which I explained, which are the constitutionalists. Obviously, Clarence Thomas would be in this category, and a few others, but we have to see how they rule in the long term before I put Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett in that category. There's the conservative justices, which might be a Kavanaugh or a Roberts or an Alito, although I think they're actually in the category of Republican justices, which kind of go with the ebbs and flows of the political things. Alito, I often worry, is in the Republican category, and because he's in the Republican category, he has political considerations, or he imbues his rulings with political considerations, much in the same way that Roberts does. This is why Roberts did the Obamacare ruling the way that he did it, because he was worried that that would call into question the legitimacy of the Supreme Court as an apolitical branch. Of course, this is ironic because he was making a distinctly political decision in that manner. This is why I'm going to put forward out there in the public that the leaker in question might actually be from Alito's camp doing the leaking on behalf of Alito. So what I believe in terms of Alito is that he would have put out this draft ruling, which is the strongest rebuke of Roe versus Wade that you could possibly have, out into the public so that he can gauge the reaction and hide behind the fact that it's only a draft resolution. It's only a draft ruling. So there could be changes and all this other stuff going forward. And he could say, oh, well, this was just my initial thoughts, but when I looked at the specific parameters of the case, if the broad reaction is really bad, I actually decided to tailor it more specifically to this case. We see this all the time with Supreme Court rulings. Remember, when they were doing the eviction moratorium, which the Biden administration had no legitimate cause to implement through the CDC, Brett Kavanaugh did this, where he said, okay, there is no basis for it, but since this is going to end in a couple of days, we're not going to bother to strike it down. Then, of course, the Biden administration took advantage of the fact that it wasn't struck it down in order to extend it, which pissed off the Supreme Court. But again, it's on Kavanaugh in that situation for not making a specific ruling that restricts government power. And the reason he didn't do it in that scenario is because he didn't want future Republican administrations to not have access to that power through the executive branch and their regulatory agencies. All these justices that aren't super principled in terms of constitutional rulings do the same things. They'll narrowly tailor their decision to the issue at hand, never making a broad ruling about anything because they don't want to deal with the implications, and they don't want their guys from their party to deal with the implications of that ruling going forward. This is one of the reasons why so many of the Second Amendment cases were actually very specific to a pistol or gun in common use in the home, and now we have a bunch of different cases about potentially bringing the gun outside, even though the Second Amendment right says clearly keep and bear arms. So you should be able to bear it, not just inside your home. It makes no sense otherwise. So I think it is possible that Alito leaked this to the press to kind of get a gauge on what the reaction of this would be, because I am in the camp that Republican justices are cowards and they want to keep this as a wedge issue, and they're never going to do anything super broad to strike down Roe versus Wade. So I would be shocked if I were wrong in this regard. The other option is Justice Roberts. He is the Chief Justice. He likely would have access to this. He is voting with the left on this issue, and he's often been cited as one of those justices appointed by Republicans that were never that good in the first place and have slowly but surely moved over to the left wing. So he could have released it to gauge a reaction to kind of push Alito or some of the other weaker justices into the left wing camp, or at least into the tailoring down the opinion camp. But that's really where I'm at in terms of who actually did this. I don't actually believe that the Republicans have a clerk on staff that's clerking for a judge or the Republican justices or Republican appointed justices or whatever that would necessarily leak this case in particular to the press. I think that they would have members on their staff that feel sketchy about overturning Roe versus Wade due to political considerations, and those members would leak this decision out into the public to kind of get a gauge of how the public is going to react before finally publishing this ruling. That's my theory. It's a conspiracy theory, but I think it's 100% accurate if you think about it, and believe me, because I'm always right. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, you show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about Roe versus Wade potentially being overturned. Till next time.